This is Ilm Circle, a learning workshop presented by the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Arizona, or ISBA. Ilm stands for Intentional Learning for Mutual Respect, the foundation of what ISBA is all about.
Welcome everyone tonight. My name is Michelle Marion, and I am one of the board members of the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Arizona. And I'm very pleased to welcome you tonight to our first Ilm Circle of 2022. So tonight's topic is end-of-life practices in Judaism. And I've talked to Rabbi Maki. This presentation will be in 4 parts, and we'll take questions after each part. So please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go, and then I will moderate those as we're coming up to each section break. But it is my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Akiva Maki tonight. Rabbi Maki became a rabbi 3 years ago to pursue chaplaincy as a late life career change. As part of this endeavor, he obtained a master's degree in arts in interfaith action from Claremont Lincoln University. He's been an interfaith speaker representing the Jewish faith for the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Arizona and the Islamic Network Group in San Jose, California. He was the chair for the East Bay Jewish Community Relations Council and served on the council for about 10 years. Prior to moving to Arizona and seeking a career change, he worked in the IT industry as an independent computer consultant specializing in small business systems. He completed a master's degree in science and information technology in 2005. He is a veteran and is the on-call rabbi for the Phoenix VA Hospital. His interests include reading, writing, learning, and teaching the Torah, photography, and when possible, traveling. Rabbi Maki is married and he lives in Scottsdale, Arizona. And before moving to Scottsdale in 2016, he lived in the San Francisco Bay Area and grew up in the very beautiful Vancouver, Washington. So Rabbi, we're very pleased to welcome you tonight, and we're really excited about this topic. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle. So before I begin, I want to, we'll go back. I want to just say that the presentation I'm giving is from an Orthodox perspective. The practices that I'm going to be detailing are all accepted basic Orthodox practices, but at the same time, Judaism has a law for everything. And as a result, we've got the complexity and the number of laws that govern just everyday life are astounding. And when it comes to something such as funerals or that, just to study what is necessary for being able to do funerals, and it's called the velus, which means mourners in general. That alone, a fast study for that takes 10 months to a year. And so there is no way I'm going to be able to address all of the topics in depth. So this is just basically a very high level overview without getting into the minutia of Jewish law. So these are very broad strokes. It's a very rough picture. And with that, I'll commence. Rabbi Lamb, who was who's from YU, Yeshiva University in New York, and it's also the seat of the Orthodox Union, which is one of the largest Orthodox organizations within the United States, wrote in his book, The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning, that death is a night that lies between 2 days, the day of life on earth and the day of eternal life in the world to come. And many years ago, I heard the saying that if you want to experience God, observe how the community treats one another. And if you want to see God, join the Hebra Kaddish. And basically, we're commanded to take care of our neighbor, the stranger, the widow, the orphan. And as such, you know, when the community takes care of its own, that is the experience of God. But if you want to see God and you join the Hever Kaddish is a burial society, and they perform a process that is called the Tahara, or a ritual cleansing of the body before it's placed in the casket. And so the Hever Kaddish actually works with the body of the person who died. And when I say, if you want to see God, you see God by seeing what is not there. You have a person in front of you who was alive and they are now dead. And what you do, and the seeing of God comes in not seeing the person alive, but seeing them dead. And it's something that I think about often, I think about a lot, and I sort of carry that with me. And it's sort of a thought I want to keep so far when the presentation, as the presentation proceeds. Jewish law governs everything that happens from the time just before death until the end of the mourning process. It starts with the care of the deceased. Man is made in the image of God and animated by the breath of God. As such, a body is sacred and holy. And the Hebrew term kavod emet means, or kavod hamet means respecting the dead body. And everything that starts at the point of death is focused on the body, the person who died, until burial. So the Jewish mourning process, the funeral, everything is divided into parts. So to begin with, when somebody has died, we have to guard the body. And so just from before the moment of death until the deceased is interned, their body is guarded by a shomer, which means a guard in Hebrew. Shomer is a person who will sit with the body. And originally it was done to prevent animals, mice, rats, other predatory animals or whatever from desecrating the body before it was buried. Today, the shomer is considered to be a companion to the person who died, and their spirit is said to be present around their body until it is buried. So the shomer, the person who guards them, is a companion to the soul until it is buried. And so we have somebody sit with the body from the point of death until burial. And the shomer is supposed to sit and read Tehillim or read Psalms during that time. And there are certain Psalms that are marked out to be read in the presence of somebody who has died. And they do that over and over again the entire night, if they're sitting the night, or for the hour or two that they've volunteered to sit with the body. And usually it's somebody from the Hever Kaddish or associated with the Hever Kaddish who will be a shomer. And when it comes time for the funeral, at a time as near to the burial as possible. So if somebody's going to be buried in the afternoon, that morning, they would receive what is called the Tahara. And the Tahara is the ritual washing I mentioned earlier. And the process for performing a Tahara includes asking the deceased for forgiveness for any harm or indignities that may occur during the Tahara, because we have to manipulate the body, we have to move it, we wash it, we give it a thorough cleaning. And so we want to be respectful of the body. And this is all done with great respect. It's done in silence. One person will lead the Tahara and read the prayers while the other people actually perform the work of cleaning and washing the body. And there is a liturgy that is read during the Tahara. And the liturgy is actually quite beautiful. We just don't have time to go over that as well. But the whole idea is asking for forgiveness for this person, you know, and doing as much as we can to make them ritually pure before they are buried. The body is completely cleaned. Then they are wrapped in a shroud, and it is a plain linen shroud. And there is no embalming. If they died in an accident and there's bloody clothing or something like that, we gather all of the clothing and we'll bury it with them. We want to make sure that we get as much of the person as absolutely possible, you know, and the blood is in the life, as it says in the Torah. If the deceased is a man and he regularly went to synagogue and he has a tallis or a prayer shawl that he would wear, the prayer shawl will be wrapped around him. Only prior to wrapping him in the prayer shawl, we'll cut off a corner of it because the prayer shawl is used to fulfill a commandment or a mitzvah. And because the dead cannot perform any mitzvahs, we make sure that the tallis cannot be used for performing a mitzvah. And then the body is placed in the casket or the aron. The thing about all of this is that we believe that the person who has died, they are still there, they are present, and we do not do anything in their presence to cause them distress. And anything that might cause them distress, you know, anything that people normally do, eating, drinking, smoking, none of that is done in the presence of the body. There's no joking around. There's no horseplay or anything like that. And, you know, and everything is done very respectfully, very quietly, as well as, you know, with great honor for the person who is there. You know, that person has the sanctity of a Sefer Torah scroll that is no longer usable. And every body, you know, Jew or non-Jew, is considered to be, you know, to have that status because the breath of God once animated that body. The casket is made completely from wood. It has no nails or metal. And the primary purpose of a simple wooden casket is to facilitate the returning of the body to the dust. And it also has the added benefit of making sure that funerals are not exorbitantly expensive, and we will place soil in the casket. So the Hever Kadisha does the Tahara, dresses the body in the shroud, and places them in the casket. And once they've placed them in the casket and closed it, that casket is not reopened, except under extreme circumstances. And then the next step in the process is having the funeral service and the interment. And these things are codified, but they also happen in a way that is, you know, no two funerals are going to be the same. No, you know, and things will be rearranged depending upon the rabbi who is officiating. And to, you know, and to even take that one step further, a rabbi is not needed to officiate at a funeral. Anybody, any knowledgeable Jew can do that, so long as they know what they're doing. However, it is preferable to have a rabbi, especially here in the United States. So in Genesis 2:7, the verse says, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. And in Genesis 3:19, it says, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. And that is very much the idea behind a Jewish funeral. We want to make sure that somebody gets back to where they, back to where we came from. It follows a set order. They will be rearranged, and the funeral is usually short. With the focus being on the deceased and what is called Yakara de Shavika, which means for honor and dignity of the dead. And the major points of the funeral are, first of all, where. Funerals are rarely held in a synagogue, almost never. I think I've seen 2, maybe 3 synagogue funerals in the last 20 years. If there is an indoor funeral, it'll be held at the mortuary chapel. And otherwise, the funeral and interment are combined and the entire service is held graveside. The first part of the service is called Kriya, and Kriya is the tearing of one's shirt, or a woman's blouse, and or it could be an outer garment, a sweater, or something like that. And the purpose for the Kriya is to express one's sorrow at hearing of the death of what is called a near relative. The near relative is going to be a parent, a spouse, a brother, a sister, a son, or a daughter. And those are the ones for whom we will tear our clothing for. And we tear it from the neckline down to the heart to expose our heart. And it's symbolic of, ripping our heart. And when one does Kriya, they also say the blessing of Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam dayan ha'amet, which means, blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, the true judge. And, meaning that God is in control of everything, both of life and death. And that blessing, an abbreviated part of that blessing, Baruch dayan ha'amet, blessed, blessed is the true judge, is also something that we say when we hear of unfortunate events. If the mourner has not performed Kriya prior to the funeral, and some people, when they hear about the death of a parent, will immediately rip their clothes. It is done at the cemetery before the beginning of the funeral, and it's usually done with the assistance of a rabbi. The use of ribbons, which some of you may have seen that people do at Jewish funerals, is not an Orthodox practice. It is used by the other movements in Judaism, but the Orthodox go all in and will rip our clothes. After Kriya, there's the processional, and the processional is moving the casket from the hearse to the graveside. It is a solemn process, and during the process, we take 7 stops. And the stops are all an expression of where it says in Ecclesiastes, vanity of all vanities, all is vanity. The Hebrew word for vanity is hevel, which means a short exhaled breath, which if seen on a cold day will dissipate in the fog. And the idea behind that is these stops represent the hevel, the small short breath that is exhaled. And it's just out of respect and honor for the dead. And also during the processional, Psalm 91 is read, and depending upon the custom of the community, it's read anywhere from 1 to 7 times, usually being read once, 3 times, or 7. And once the grave is reached, the casket is placed over the grave. And if the eulogies were said in the mortuary chapel prior to bringing the casket to the graveyard, then it is placed in the grave immediately. Otherwise, it is left above the grave until after the eulogies are done. The eulogies consist of 2 parts, or should at least. One is called a hesped, and the other one is called a bekai. The hesped is the praising of the deceased's life's accomplishments and other praises that can be truthfully related. The bekai is the expression of grief and the sense of loss experienced by the mourners and the Jewish community. The eulogy is usually given by a rabbi, hopefully one who knew the person who died. Family members and others who knew the deceased are offered an opportunity to speak, and the eulogy should be karayui, or balanced and appropriate. Sages say that until the deceased is buried, their neshama, their soul, can hear all that is said in their presence. And finally, the eulogy is also a form of testimony. The deceased is facing their final judgment in the world to come, and any testimony given on their behalf is also heard in the heavenly court. So if you're standing there beside somebody's grave, I've actually heard a rabbi say, I can't say that about somebody at a funeral because I don't believe it to be true, and I'm not going to give false testimony at their funeral. And so depending upon the rabbi, that is, something that needs to be kept in mind. We are saying things about a person, they are going to meet their maker, and what we say can have an impact. And so we need to be very careful when we give a eulogy. And there are times when eulogies are not said based upon the Jewish calendar. And these are usually on holidays. and special days throughout the year, which I'm not going to go into, but there are days when eulogies are not done, and also on the days that eulogies are not done, Kaddish, that a eulogy is not done, funerals are not done either. It's and so we have to be aware of those days as well. The other thing is there are certain days that we can't have funerals, and on Shabbat, all mourning is ceased. We do not mourn on Shabbat. So somebody who is in mourning, even though they go to synagogue, we do not extend, the traditional greeting for people who are in mourning or anything else on Shabbat and holidays. So, there's the idea that we are in control of ourselves, our emotions, and our lives, and that we have, there are times when we have to exercise that. And mourning takes a second seat to the observances that we are supposed to do, such as Shabbat being the holiest day of the year and a day of joy and rejoicing. Okay, burial should take place in a Jewish cemetery. To be buried any place other than a Jewish cemetery is like separating yourself from your community and from your people, and is frowned upon. You have to be buried in the dirt or in connection with the dirt, so that the process of natural decomposition can occur the way that it should. We don't want to hasten it, and we don't want to slow it down. And that's one of the reasons why, we do not allow embalming, because that would slow down the process of decomposition. Also, it removes things from a person's body that we want to bury them with. Cremation, burial in an elevated vault, or by some other means that disconnects the body from the earth, is strictly forbidden. Interment occurs when the casket has been lowered into the grave. It is customary for the mourners and others present to actually dig the dirt and throw it on the casket. And until the casket is covered, we usually turn the shovel over and use the back of the shovel to do it, to prolong the process, and also to show that things are not normal, to just grab the shovel and start throwing dirt. Things aren't normal. Everybody's life is disrupted. The mourners, the people who are there, those who knew the person who died, everybody's grieving at one level or another. And to pretend that everything is the way it should be is false. So we act it out by not using a shovel in the normal manner until the casket has been covered. Manually filling the grave is seen to be as an honor to both the deceased and those attending the funeral. It is also a duty for those who are alive to be able to do that. And once the casket is covered, then the funeral can officially end, and it can be left to the cemetery workers to finish the job. Or if the rabbi and the people present want to finish filling the grave themselves, then they can go ahead and do so. And once the casket's been covered, they can actually flip the shovels over and do it a little more quickly. Maurice Lamb, who I quote several times throughout this, says, "This is a silent symbolic gesture expressing the prayer that the tragedy of death be not contagious." Oh, the other thing, that's it. We do not hand the shovel to somebody else when we're done shoveling. We stick it in the dirt, or we lay it on the ground, and the next person actually has to pick it up themselves. And this is a silent symbolic gesture expressing the prayer that tragedy of death be not contagious, and that the remainder of family and friends may live long and peaceful lives. I just thought that was beautiful. Once the casket has been covered, the mourners will recite what is called the Burial Kaddish, which is an extended form of Kaddish. We'll talk about that a little later. And but the thing about the Burial Kaddish and Kaddish in general, is that it's a prayer that affirms that God will recreate the world and that the deceased will be raised to everlasting life. It speaks of hope for the future and the coming of the Messiah. And the recital of the Burial Kaddish also follows the same rules as those of offering a eulogy. So if a eulogy is not done, then the Burial Kaddish is not said either at the funeral. And there are times when neither of those happen, but the eulogy can be given at a later date. Depending upon the rabbi and the wishes of the family, like I said earlier, the grave can be completely filled or not. It just depends. Okay. What's going on? Oh, I gotta hit the right button. Okay, after the interment, there is the recessional, and the recessional occurs prior to leaving the cemetery, and it marks a transition from the focus being on the person who died to being on the mourners themselves, the people who lost a member of their family. And the funeral attendees will line up in 2 lines, and the mourners will pass between them. And as they do, those in attendance offer what are called the traditional words of comfort. It's Hamakon, Yachem, Etechem, Betoch, Sha'ar, Aveli, Zion, V'Yushalayim. May the Lord comfort you among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And this is a traditional greeting that is, or a traditional blessing that is given at the cemetery. It's also given when one leaves a Shiva house. And if you know somebody is mourning and that they are within the first 30 days, you can say that to them when leaving their presence, and it's a way of comforting them as we leave. The recession, yeah, okay. And then when you leave the cemetery, there's also the tradition to ritually wash our hands as we leave the cemetery. Okay, Shiva is a period of mourning that lasts for 7 days. It begins immediately after internment. And Shiva is set aside as a time for intense mourning. And it is usually observed in the home of the deceased or the home of one of their relatives. Shiva doesn't have to take place there, it just depends. And prior to the mourners returning from the cemetery, the community should have, one, prepared the Shiva home, made sure that it was set up ready to receive guests, arranged for a meal of condolence for the family and visitors, and also set up a washing station outside so that those returning from the graveyard can wash their hands before entering the house. The meal of condolence is actually commanded. It is a transitional event that begins to gently bring the people from being at the graveside back to being in their home, and while at the same time, it's symbolic of coming from the grave back to the living. And during the 7 days of Shiva, the community should care for the mourners by visiting and bringing them meals. During Shiva, mourners do not work. They sit on stools or low chairs, pillows, or on the ground. They do not leave the house except under certain circumstances. Those who are mourning do not bathe. They can use sponge baths are accepted. You have to take care of yourself to a point, and men do not shave. They wear their torn garment, the one that they did Kriya on. They do not engage in marital relations, do not listen to music, do not drink wine, and they do not wear leather shoes. Those are all just traditional Jewish mourning practices. In the Shiva home, all of the mirrors are covered because, somebody who is in mourning, they're not looking their best and they don't want to look at themselves, being disheveled and deranged. The door of the home is left open or unlocked so that members of the community can just come in, so that the people who live there don't have to answer the door. And when possible, all weekday services are held in the Shiva home instead of the synagogue, so that the mourners can recite Kaddish. At the end of Shiva, which is 7 days, and like I said, it starts after internment, and it and that starts the 7 days. And the day, if it's the middle of the day, that's considered a complete day. On the 7th day, it ends after the morning service would normally happen. And after that morning service, the rabbi will usually take the mourners outside and walk with them. That's the first time the mourners have left their house in 7 days. And the practice is called getting up from Shiva. And the walk symbolizes a return to normal life, which won't be completed until the end of Shloshim, which is 30 days, or a year if somebody lost a parent. Shloshim is the extended period of mourning that lasts for 30 days. It also starts at the same time as Shiva. And during Shloshim, a mourner does not cut their hair. They do not wear new clothes. They do not listen to music. They don't go to parties, and they do not get married. In all cases, except for the death of a parent, Shloshim ends the formal mourning period. 12 months of mourning is reserved for the loss of a parent. And that begins, the 12 months begins on the day of death, not on burial. During this period, the mourner limits their haircuts, the wearing of new clothes, and the mourner will often lead the weekday services in the synagogue when we go to, and we pray 3 times a day. In the morning and in the evening, and in the evening there's 2 services that are usually combined. So or it can be three separate and distinct services, but the mourner or a mourner often leads those services. They avoid listening to live music, dancing, or other joyous events during those 12 months, except for those events where it is religiously mandated that they attend bar mitzvah, bris, a circumcision ceremony, or whatever. A son who has lost his parents is obligated to say Kaddish for 11 of the 12 months. And the reason why it's 11 of the 12 months of mourning is that when somebody dies, we believe that they go to Gehenna, unless they're just an absolutely perfect righteous person who might go straight to Olam Haba. Most people it's expected that we're going to go to Gehenna, and Gehenna is sort of, I like to call it the spiritual washing machine. It's if you want to compare it to a Christian concept, it's probably closest related to the Catholic idea of purgatory, but it's a place where we are spiritually cleansed before we go on to the world to come, or the world to come, Olam Haba, or what you might call heaven. But it's believed that the most evil person would have to stay in Gehenna for 12 months before they could get out and go to the world to come. And a child saying Kaddish for their parents will stop at 11 months because their parents could not have been so evil as to require that additional month of prayers and Kaddish to get into Olam Haba. So they may mourn for 12 months, but it's assumed that after 11 months, everybody gets kicked loose and gets to go to Olam Haba. And it's sort of, it's just a nice way of saying, nobody is totally, completely evil. And the 12-month mourning period is also the fulfillment of the command to honor your father and your mother, that you may long endure on the land that the Lord your God is assigning to you. And that's from Exodus 20:12, which is also one of the 10 Commandments. At the funeral, you've heard me mention Kaddish several times. Kaddish is often referred to as the Jewish prayer for the dead. It's not, it is and it isn't, because we use Kaddish for mourners, and mourners recite Kaddish, but Kaddish is also an integral part of the Jewish prayer service. No, that doesn't make sense. Okay, Kaddish, okay. And Kaddish is an Aramaic poem, and it declares by beginning, only God knows the world and its ends, only God knows the world. And it ends with words from Job that his friends said to him, with words of hope. Ose shalom b'mramav, so let there be peace. And those were the words that were said to Job from his friends. And it's also said that the original Kaddish prayer was written by the men of the Great Assembly, which were the great rabbis of their day, after the destruction of the first temple, and that it was a commemorative prayer written for the destruction of the temple to express hope in the rebuilding of the temple. And it slowly found its way into Jewish prayer and into Jewish mourning practices. The opening lines of Kaddish come from Ezekiel 38:23, which says, "Thus I will manifest my greatness and my holiness." That phrase is actually just two words, via Kadal, via Kadash, and then the rest of it, "and make myself known in the sight of many nations, and they shall know I am Lord." That's how Kaddish starts. It does not contain the name of God, neither what the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, or any other significant name of God that is used in the Bible does not appear in the Kaddish. Kaddish is in Aramaic, and it is meant to both inspire and console at the same time. The obligation to say Kaddish keeps the bereaved connected to the community and allows the community to console them. And there have been a number of times when somebody who wasn't necessarily religious would go to synagogue to start saying Kaddish for their parent. And by the time they're done saying Kaddish, they're actually back in the fold. And so it's also seen as a means to bring people back to their Yiddishkeit. Rabbi Lamb says about Kaddish, because the concepts found in the Kaddish, the very words offer implicit comfort because of the extenuation and repetition of the possible thoughts of life and peace. These values become impressed on the bewildered and those with saddened hearts. It transfers subliminally the fixed inner gate of the mourner from the departed to the living, from crisis to peace, from despair to hope, from isolation to community. After the formal mourning periods, there are a few other things that happen. One is the monument and the unveiling. These are codified in Jewish law that every Jewish grave should have a memorial marker. It is customary, although it happens in different ways in different communities, to have the memorial marker, the gravestone, installed by the 11th month after the burial. And that coincides with the 11 months of saying Kaddish. And once the gravestone has been placed and the 11 months pass, the family, sometimes with a rabbi, will uncover the stone, offer additional eulogies, have friends come to the cemetery, and then afterwards they will go on and possibly go back to the synagogue and have a bite to eat. That's where it is. Okay. The other post-mourning practice is yard site. Every year on the anniversary of the loved one's death, it is commemorated by going to synagogue and saying the mourner's Kaddish. Oftentimes, the person who has a yard site will lead the prayers. After the morning service, usually the mourner very often will bring some food and a bottle of liquor to the synagogue. And after the service is over, they say a l'chaim, to life, a toast in memory of their loved ones, and everybody has a bite to eat. And sometimes after a yard site, people will go and visit the grave of their loved one. Another way of remembering those who passed is called Yisker. And Yisker is section of the liturgy for Jewish holidays. And it usually occurs on the second day of the holiday in the United States or in the diaspora, because we have 2 days of holiday at the beginning of each holiday and at the end of each holiday. And usually the second day is the one when Yisker is said. And it is a special liturgy for remembering those people who have passed, our close relatives. Prayers are also said for Israeli soldiers who have died defending the state of Israel, the people who perished in the Holocaust, and anybody else whom you wish to say a prayer for during that time. Included in the Yisker prayer is a vow to give tzedakah, which is called righteous giving, and that usually means giving some money to an organization, a charity in the memory and merit of the deceased. And also during the Yisker, because people are crying, people will leave, children and those who do not have a close relative who has died, leave the sanctuary. And so Yisker is sort of a private ceremony at the same time. And even though it occurs on a holiday, it's a brief time set aside for the mourning and the remembering of those who've passed. And that's it. I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so very much, Rabbi. That was quite informative, at least for me. I hope for everyone else too.
Yeah.
So questions, and please feel free, our audience members, feel free to unmute and ask a question, or if you want to pop a question into the chat, that would work too. And I have a warm-up question, and I'm totally a lay person with regard to Judaism, but I was always taught at the time of a person's passing to the time of the funeral, that folks try to make that a 24-hour window. Is that true?
As soon as possible. If it is possible to bury the person on the next day, we will.
Okay.
But usually the problem is that here in the United States, at least, that's almost impossible to do, because you need death certificates. Sometimes you need clearance from the coroner. You have to get a permit to do the burial. And with all of the red tape that's involved, it usually takes at least 2 to 3 days before the funeral can happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I see that Betty and Stan have their hand raised.
Yeah, one of the things you didn't mention was a Yutzite candle.
That is true. I missed that. But there's two candles. One, there's the Shiva candle, and two, there's a Yahrzeit candle. When the people go home to sit Shiva after they've been at the cemetery, they light a candle, which is a 7-day candle, and that's called the Shiva candle, and that's left burning in remembrance of the person who died, and representative of their spirit or their neshama. And then every year when somebody has a Yahrzeit, it's customary to, on the date of their Yahrzeit, and in Jewish counting and Islamic counting of the days, starts the night before at sundown. Yeah. So the night before at sundown, you light your Yahrzeit candle, and it'll burn for 24 hours. And also on any day when Yisker is said in the synagogue, we also light a Yahrzeit candle.
Well, I also do something else that I don't know I know it's not traditional, but I've done it for years. In honor of the people who died in memory of the people who died in the Holocaust, I stand for Shiva.
You what?
I stand when they say Kaddish.
Uh-huh.
All the time.
Oh yeah, well, actually,
there's nobody to say it for them.
Right. Well, traditionally, Ashkenazim stand for Kaddish, and Sephardim sit. So it depends on your tradition as to whether or not you stand or sit when Kaddish is said.
That's like eating rice at Pesach. That's like eating rice at Passover.
That's right. Mm-hmm. It is.
Okay. And we have a question in the chat. What is the Aron? You had mentioned putting the body in the maker or the Aron.
The casket is called an Aron, which means ark. and it also means casket. Thing about Hebrew words is that they are multi-purpose. They come from a common root, and a word can have many meanings depending on the context. But in this case, the aron means the casket, and also in the synagogue where we store the Torah scrolls, that's also called an aron.
Oh,
So, there is, a symbolic and linguistic connection there between the two.
mhm. Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned during the Shiva window of time, things that people are not to do if they're of the family. And I found the mention of not wearing leather shoes to be quite interesting. Could you, I understood the others, but I wasn't quite sure about the leather shoes.
The leather shoes comes from the time when leather shoes were a symbol of wealth and of prosperity, and and the other thing too that I think I missed in the presentation itself is that around 200 CE, Rabbi Gamliel, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, he was the big Jew in charge, ordered that, or he didn't order, but what he did was he was frustrated with the Jewish community because they were having lavish and extravagant funerals. And so when he died, he decreed that he should be buried in that he should be buried in just a shroud, because at that time they didn't really, use caskets.
Mhm.
And the caskets later on, in order to keep with the idea of being able to return to the dust as quickly as possible, that's the whole idea behind the wooden caskets. But he commanded that he just be buried wrapped in a linen shroud and buried in that. And that practice stuck from that time on. And the idea behind that is to, one, democratize the funeral. Everybody is the same in birth and in death. Two, the idea is that we're all going to stand before our Creator. We're all equal in that. And it's sort of, the idea is that, it's sort of assumed you're going to stand before your Creator in your shroud
Mhm.
and be judged.
Mhm.
When my wife died, prior to her dying, she wanted very much to be buried in a wedding dress. And she talked to the rabbi, and he said, no, can't do that. And he compromised with her. So she got to hold it.
Oh, yeah.
But even that is very unusual and a very rare concession,
Mhm.
because, we're not buried with material things because we have no use for them, and that they were pagan practices, to bury them, people with food and all kinds of stuff, so that, it helped them on their journey. If you read about funerals from many different societies, and especially back in a time when idol worship was very common, many different practices occurred, and a lot of what we do is to make sure that we have nothing that looks or resembles anything like the practices of the idol worshipers.
Mhm.
And so no food, no jewelry, nothing. Naked we come into this world, and naked we shall leave it.
Mhm. Yes, yes. So we have a number of questions, Rabbi. So I'm going to take Naomi's first. I think it might have
Okay.
come in. I know I see Tracy's hand up as well. Where are the laws of death codified?
They are codified in the Shulchan Aruch is the name of the book. It was written by Rabbi Yosef Cairo in about the 1500s, where what it is it's a codification of all of the arguments that are found in the Talmud. And it's divided into 4 parts. One of them covers daily living. One of them covers rituals and things like that. So the laws of Avelus, or mourning and burial, are found in the second set of books of the Shulchan Aruch, which are called Yoredea.
All right, thank you. And I see Tracy has her hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that I was interested by, you said that very rarely are the funerals held in the synagogue. For what reason?
Because there is the idea of the only people who usually have a synagogue funeral are very very esteemed rabbis or very highly esteemed members of the community for whom, you know, the rabbi says, yeah, it's proper for, you know, we can give them a synagogue funeral. But usually it's just not done. And the other thing is that associated with a body is there's an idea that there's a certain amount of impurity. And it's like, you know, and in a sense, it's like bringing death into the synagogue. And so you don't really want to do that unless there are something extenuating circumstances. It's just like if somebody dies inside of a house, any open container in that house, the people will usually take whatever was in those containers and dump it out, be it food, be it water, whatever. It's considered to be impure because of the death. And so they'll dump all of those out.
Okay, thank you. I was fascinated.
Oh, good.
And Asra has a question about the 12-month mourning period.
Mhm.
Is that across all of the delineations of Judaism, or is that specific to Orthodoxy?
I would say that it is across all of the movements of Judaism.
Okay.
Yeah, that applies all across. One of the things where I think all of the movements sort of conflate is they conflate around births. You know, Jewish boy is born, he's going to have a bris. You know, you're going to have a baby naming. You know, the practices are going to be pretty much the same regarding births and also regarding deaths.
Mhm.
And I've looked at the liturgy that the Reform movement uses, and it's very close and very similar to what is used by the Orthodox rabbis. It has some changes, and some things are maybe not quite as elaborate, but the basic elements are there. I think that where you see differences are. I went to a Reformed funeral where the person was actually cremated. And there, I think you know, and how the body is treated is sometimes not going to be the same from one movement to the next. But within the Orthodox movement, you know, cremation is frowned upon. And if there's actually a woman who lives here in Scottsdale who she hears of a death and and that the family is thinking about cremating the person, or that she actually gets involved and works very hard to help them not cremate that person and give them a full and proper Jewish funeral. And she's done that, I don't know how many times. She works at that very hard, but that's one of her missions. And so she works at that. The idea of cremation is just, it's pretty much anathema to Orthodox Judaism.
Oh, and Betty and Stan have another question. I see their hand up.
It's actually, for the most part, most of the funerals that I have been to, Jewish funerals I'm talking about now, have I seen somebody buried in the shroud. In many cases, the families were, I mean, I was bar mitzvah Orthodox, but I'm not Orthodox. I wouldn't call myself Orthodox at this point. But most of the funerals I've been to, they've had, you know, having somebody stay with the body and washing the body, that yes. But
Right.
for the most part, I haven't seen funerals where somebody was buried in a shroud.
No, we can't. In the United States, it's very difficult to just bury somebody in a shroud because it's usually against state law. However, inside the casket, that person is in a shroud. So what happens with the Tahara is that in the Tahara, wash the body, we clothe it in the shroud, we place the body in the casket, and so they are shrouded when they go into the casket.
Even if you're viewing the body?
There is no viewing of the body at a Jewish funeral.
I've seen it go. I've seen it go.
Let me put it this way, then there shouldn't be a viewing of the
Okay, because
funeral. I mean, that is not according to Jewish law. And the other idea behind it is that, it's looked at as being even a psychological impediment. It's sort of like if you're going to have somebody there and you're going to view them, that means that the mortician has gone in and they've done a lot of work and they've tried to make this person who is dead lifelike. And in a way, Jewish thought considers that to be a lie. That's sheker. That's not the truth. This person is dead. Why make them look like they're just sleeping and going to jump out of the box in the next minute? And so that's the purpose for the closed casket. Nobody wants to actually look at a cadaver. And it's just not done or shouldn't be.
you're muted, Naomi.
Naomi, unmute.
If the purpose or the end goal is to return to dust, that's what happens with cremation. You become dust.
No, you become ash. You become ash with cremation.
Well, isn't ash a form of dust?
They're very different. It's not the same. Pick up a handful of ashes and pick up a handful of dirt. They're not the same. The idea is from dust we came, and to dust we shall return. And we came from the ground and we'll go back to the ground. And ashes are not dirt. And the other thing too is that the idea is that, you're destroying the body that is going to be resurrected. There's that aspect of it as well.
But if the body is already dust, how can it be resurrected?
It's a question I'm going to have to ask when I get there.
So I think we have time for one more question.
I really don't have an answer for that, other than it's a matter of faith.
I think we have time for one more question, and Tracy has her hand up.
So being a chaplain, much like you, when you are with a patient who is Orthodox Jewish, like for myself, being an interfaith chaplain, what is the best thing that I can do for the patient, for the family, and at the same time being able to honor and respect their faith traditions?
First of all, it depends on where they are at in terms of their own faith. If you're with an Orthodox family, I think that your one and only visit to them would be, we want our rabbi, and you would get them their rabbi, and you'd check back in to see how they're doing and all of that. But the rabbi would be there because the rabbi will want to make sure that the person who is dying, if they're dying, will have said what is called Vetoing, which is basically a confession and repentance, and that they've said that they're prepared and ready to go, and that the rabbi will work with them and the family in that sense. And as an interfaith chaplain, it would be to ask them what they would like from you.
That's kind of what I thought your answer would be, but I thought I would check.
Well, I
Akiva
want
and
to
I were
thank
in-
everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you all.
And I want to invite everyone to our next event, which is on February 22nd at 6:30. It's the end of life in Islam. And so if we could give Rabbi Maki a round of applause. Our great appreciation for your great information for us tonight and for taking the time to join us. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. It's been my honor and pleasure to do this.